Lucy Turner never thought her life could change so drastically in the span of a few months. As a hard-working waitress in a small-town diner, she spent her days refilling coffee cups and listening to her customers' stories, all while wondering if she'd ever find a story of her own worth telling. Then she met Jacob, quiet, unassuming, and seemingly just as down on his luck as Lucy was. Little did she know, beneath his gentle smile and worn-out sweater lay a hidden truth. On the night of their wedding, Lucy would learn that the man she thought was penniless had more wealth than she could ever imagine. Lucy Turner woke up to the blaring beeps of her alarm clock at 5 in the morning, as she did nearly every day. She lived in a modest studio apartment on the outskirts of Westwood, a small town that was known more for its abandoned mills than any sign of prosperity. The faded wallpaper in her apartment hinted at better days long gone. Still, Lucy refused to let her circumstances define her. She had her health, her ambition, though it sometimes faltered, and a resilient hope that kept her going. That morning she slipped into her uniform black slacks and a plain white button-up shirt with the diner's embroidered logo on the pocket. Her reflection in the mirror was one of tired eyes, yet there was a spark of warmth that her regular customers had come to cherish. She tied back her auburn hair and headed out into the crisp morning air. The diner was only a short walk from her apartment, a distance she valued for saving on gas. The wind brushed against her cheeks, reminding her how easily life could chill a person's spirit if they weren't careful to keep an inner fire burning. She arrived before opening time as usual to start setting up for the early bird customers who wandered in at dawn. Inside, she flicked on the lights, revealing the familiar scuffed linoleum floors, faded red booth seats and chrome-edged tables. A nostalgic smell of brewed coffee mixed with lingering cooking oil filled the air. She grabbed an apron from the hook by the kitchen door, nodding a greeting to Don the cook who'd arrived just before her. Don was a middle-aged man with a perpetually stained baseball cap and a heart of gold. He offered her a mug of fresh coffee to start the day. "Morning, Lucy," he said with a gentle smile. "Heard the water heaters on the fritz again. You doing okay?" Lucy nodded. "Yeah, thanks, Don. I'm all right. I'll get through it. I've had worse days." Her shift officially began at 6, and right on cue a few regulars trickled in. She served black coffee to Old Man Harris, a retired carpenter who spent his mornings grumbling about politics into his newspaper. She brought a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon to Ms. Rose, a widowed librarian who never missed an early breakfast. By the time the morning rush was winding down, Lucy had set aside some tips that amounted to less than $20, enough for some groceries and a bit to stash away for her escape fund, as she jokingly called it. She was determined to build a better future, maybe moving to a bigger city one day, to chase a better life. For now, though, she did her best to make ends meet. Just as the door chimed again, announcing a new arrival, Lucy looked up to see a figure she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't particularly tall or broad-shouldered, but something about his quiet presence caught her attention. He wore a threadbare sweater and jeans with hair that looked like it had been flattened by a baseball cap. The man slid into a booth near the window and stared at the menu as if reading it was a form of escape. After a moment, Lucy poured a fresh mug of coffee and headed over with a practiced smile. "Morning, Hon," she said in a friendly tone, placing the coffee down gently. "Anything I can get you?" He looked up. His eyes were a disarming shade of green, carrying an unexpected kindness. "Just the coffee for now," he replied softly, clearing his throat, as if he weren't used to speaking much. "Thanks." Lucy nodded. "You just let me know if you need anything else, okay?" As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. But she had a shift to finish bills to worry about, and a life to piece together. Still, Lucy couldn't know that this quiet stranger would soon become a central figure in her own story and that would forever reshape her future in ways she had never imagined. Lucy first met Jacob, though at that time she didn't know his name, when the diner was nearly empty. After the lunch rush, she found him still seated in the corner booth, sipping his coffee, as though it was all he could afford. He hadn't ordered anything else, and the mug was now half empty. She admired his calm patience. Most customers grew restless if they stayed too long without a refill or a meal. In between her tasks of wiping down tables, refilling ketchup bottles, and tending to the few remaining customers, she glanced his way. He appeared lost in thought, staring out the window at the busy street outside, as if searching for something that never appeared. When she finally mustered the courage to check on him, Lucy approached with a plate of day-old muffins that Don was about to toss out. She placed one gently in front of him. "Don't worry about the cost," she said softly. "They were headed for the trash. But they're still good, I promise." His eyes flickered with gratitude and a hint of embarrassment. "Thank you," he replied, as though he weren't used to acts of kindness. "That's really nice of you." Lucy smiled, gesturing to the muffin. "No problem. I'm Lucy, by the way." He cleared his throat and introduced himself. Jacob Hargreaves." There was a quiet sincerity about him. Lucy sensed he was older than her by a few years, maybe in his early 30s, but he carried himself with a gentle humility that drew her in. She assumed he might be unemployed or down on his luck, a fellow struggler in a town where opportunities were scarce. As the day stretched on, Lucy's shift ended, and she found Jacob still there, finishing his muffin in small bites. She wondered if he was homeless or simply frugal. Her shift tips had barely cracked $25, and she had groceries on her mind. But a strange sense of empathy made her linger. "Is there anywhere you need a ride to?" she asked before clocking out her tone carefully neutral to hide any pity. He hesitated. "I'm, just staying in a motel for a bit. I'm new in town, looking for work." He lied without a flicker of deceit on his face. Or perhaps it wasn't entirely a lie. Lucy had no reason to doubt him. "Well, good luck," she said, nodding. "And if you need a place to eat without judgment, you know where to find me." She left the diner feeling a bit more burdened than usual. Jacob's presence scratched at her heart. The next day, to her surprise, he was back once again, ordering the cheapest item on the menu, coffee, and sitting quietly for hours. Over the span of the week, this became his routine. Sometimes he'd order a small side of toast. Other times, Lucy would offer him leftover biscuits. Each interaction was brief, but she felt a growing connection, like she was witnessing a soul as lonely as her own. One afternoon, Lucy mustered the courage to sit with Jacob during her break. Sliding into the booth across from him, she sipped her own coffee cream, and 3 sugars, her little indulgence. She noticed the faint dark circles under his eyes, the way his clothes never changed much day to day. "So what brings you here to Westwood?" she asked, keeping her tone light but curious. Jacob shrugged. "I needed a change of pace. I was burned out by my old life," he said, lifting his gaze to hers. There was a flicker of pain, or maybe regret in his expression. "I thought maybe a small town would help me think differently." Lucy nodded. She knew well the suffocating feeling of being stuck, though for her Westwood was all she'd ever known. "Well, welcome," she said softly, hoping he'd sense the sincerity in her voice. "It's not much, but it's home." Her break ended too soon, and she had to return to wiping tables. As she walked away, Jacob's eyes followed her, seemingly thoughtful. It wasn't long before Lucy and Jacob became friendly acquaintances. She'd slip him an extra muffin or a second cup of coffee on the house, and in return, he'd offer a few quiet words of gratitude. She realized that in those unspoken exchanges, they were each reaching out for the comfort of another human soul. Neither of them yet knew just how tightly their lives would soon be woven together. The next few weeks blended into a familiar routine for both Lucy and Jacob. Morning to mid-afternoon, Lucy managed the bustling breakfast and lunch crowd at the diner, deftly balancing coffee pots and hearty plates of eggs and hash browns. At some point during each shift, Jacob would appear, usually taking the same corner booth. He still wore that same threadbare sweater, still asked for a single cup of coffee, and still looked out the window with a contemplative gaze. When Lucy finally secured her short break, she'd sit with him. They started talking about small things, at first the weather, local news, funny quirks of the regulars who came to the diner. Gradually, their conversations dipped into more personal territory. Lucy learned that Jacob was originally from the city. He mentioned Chicago once, though he quickly changed the subject. She figured he was escaping some painful memory, but didn't press him. For her part, Lucy spoke freely about her life. She told him about the father she barely remembered who passed away from a heart condition when she was 5, leaving her mother to raise Lucy alone on a measly paycheck. She shared stories of her mother's unwavering determination, working multiple jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, often going without meals, so Lucy could eat. Even though Lucy was grown now, she still felt guilty that her mother had sacrificed so much. She confessed her own dreams, too. Lucy wanted to become a writer someday, or maybe even open her own bakery. The diner gig was just temporary, she often reminded herself, though. Temporary had stretched into 5 long years. She was saving up slowly, painfully, for a more stable future. Every penny she made went toward rent, groceries, or an emergency fund. Yet through it all, she managed to keep her spirit intact. Jacob listened attentively, nodding and asking gentle questions. At times, Lucy noticed a flash of what might have been admiration in his eyes. Other times he seemed haunted, as if her stories reminded him of something he'd lost or left behind. On a particularly slow Thursday afternoon, Lucy was able to spend a good half-hour at Jacob's booth. Don was in the kitchen prepping for the dinner crowd, and the diner's only other occupant was Ms. Rose, half asleep over a cup of herbal tea. The winter wind howled against the windows, making Lucy grateful for the warmth inside. "You said you used to do something else before you came here," Lucy ventured, stirring her coffee with a plastic stirrer. She tried not to sound prying, but her curiosity about Jacob's past had grown. He fiddled with his sleeve, looking down at the tabletop. "I was in finance," he finally said, choosing his words carefully. "It was stressful. I realized the life I was living wasn't what I wanted, so I left." She was about to ask another question when he changed the subject abruptly. "Tell me more about your dream bakery. What would you call it?" Lucy smiled, imagining a cozy little shop with pastel-colored walls and glass displays of freshly baked pastries. "I'd call it Sweet Delights, maybe. I picture this big glass window where passers-by can see me rolling dough and decorating cakes. I want it to feel like home, you know. Like a place people go to, not just eat, but to feel loved." Jacob's eyes flickered with enthusiasm. "It sounds wonderful." Just then the phone behind the counter rang, pulling Lucy away from the conversation. She excused herself, promising to pick up where they left off later. When she returned a few minutes later, Jacob was gone, leaving a neatly folded napkin on the table. Inside, he'd tucked in a $5 tip, far more than the cost of his coffee. Beneath it, he'd scribbled a small note. "Thank you for the muffins and for the warmth." Lucy couldn't help smiling as she read it. She slipped the $5 back into her apron, feeling strangely touched. Something about Jacob felt genuine. And even though her mind nagged her that she knew so little about him, her heart told her that he was good company in a life that often felt lonely. She cleared the table with a sense of quiet gratitude, hugging the note to her chest for a moment before tucking it safely away. In that small gesture, Lucy felt the stirring of hope. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she could hardly imagine. Jacob wasn't just another passerby seeking cheap coffee. He was a catalyst for something far greater, a transformation in both their lives that neither of them could fully see coming. After their conversation about Lucy's dream bakery, a subtle shift occurred in their relationship. It wasn't spoken of directly, but both Lucy and Jacob felt it. The tension between them was no longer simply the curiosity of new acquaintances. There was an undercurrent of genuine fondness. Before Lucy knew it, Jacob started showing up outside of her work hours too. On her day off, while she was searching for discounted groceries at the local market, she nearly bumped into him by the produce stand. He was studying the oranges with great concentration, as if deciding whether a piece of fruit was worth the splurge. Lucy laughed warmly. "Fancy seeing you here," she said. Jacob turned, startled, then smiled. "Lucy, hi. Sorry, I was just—" He held up an orange. "I guess I'm still learning how to shop for one." His cheeks reddened slightly at the admission. Lucy grinned, stepping closer. "Well, the trick is to pick ones that feel heavy for their size and have a bit of a strong citrus smell. Means they're juicy." She guided him through the selection, feeling oddly like a mentor, though he was clearly older than she was. As they walked through the aisles, Lucy couldn't help noticing how Jacob seemed almost childlike in navigating mundane tasks, comparing prices, checking expiration dates, and picking out fresh produce. But childlike wasn't quite the right word, she corrected herself. It was more as if he was seeing these everyday routines with new eyes, or maybe with a kind of relief. They checked out at the register, and Jacob insisted on paying for Lucy's small bag of groceries. She started to protest, but he shook his head with a shy smile. "Consider it a thank you for always making me feel welcome at the diner." A warmth spread through Lucy's chest at his kindness. The last person who'd ever bought her groceries was her mother, and that was years ago. She accepted graciously, though a part of her still felt uneasy letting someone else pay for her. After all, money was always tight, and she hated feeling indebted to anyone. Still, something about Jacob's gesture felt different, less transactional and more caring. At the exit, they paused under the fluorescent lights of the grocery store's awning. The sky overhead threatened rain, dark clouds rolling in quickly. Jacob glanced at Lucy, searching for words. Would you like a ride home?" She smiled wryly. "I appreciate the offer, but I actually live just a couple blocks down. I usually walk." She hefted her grocery bag, which was only about half full. "It's not heavy." "I'm good." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, sure. Just making sure you're all right." They parted ways with Lucy crossing the street and disappearing around the corner. Jacob watched her leave, his gaze lingering. He felt a strange tug at his heart, a blend of gratitude and something more profound. He didn't know how to articulate it yet, but spending time with Lucy made him feel lighter, as if the burdens of his old life were less heavy. That evening, Lucy returned to her cramped apartment. The storm outside raged with torrents of rain pelting the windows. She set aside the groceries and flopped onto the worn couch, letting out a long breath. Her thoughts drifted to Jacob, his gentle eyes, his quiet kindness, the way he seemed to listen without judgment. She fiddled with the note he'd once left her now tucked safely in her wallet. She read it again, her heart fluttering with a joy she had nearly forgotten was possible. The last time she'd felt anything akin to this was when she was a teenager, scribbling secret crushes into her diary. But this wasn't a juvenile puppy love. It was deeper tinged with empathy and understanding. Lucy still knew practically nothing about Jacob's life before Westwood, why he chose their small town, what exactly he was running from or trying to leave behind. But she realized she wanted to know perhaps more than she had ever wanted to know anyone before. She made a silent promise to herself that if Jacob wanted a friend or something more, she would be there for him. Outside, the rainstorm gradually subsided, leaving the night air cool and clean. Lucy drifted off to sleep with the soft rumble of distant thunder, her dreams occupied by a man with green eyes who could turn an ordinary cup of coffee into something extraordinary. Life rarely moved swiftly in Westwood, but for Lucy everything felt like it was happening faster than she could process. She and Jacob began to spend more time together outside the diner. Sometimes they'd walk the town's sleepy streets, stopping by the old railroad tracks, where the sun set behind a horizon of rusted train cars. Other times they'd duck into the local used bookstore, exchanging recommended titles like Secret Treasures. The store's musty corners and dim lighting made them feel like they were in a world all their own. Lucy noticed things about Jacob that strengthened her admiration for him. He was consistently thoughtful, always asking if she'd eaten lunch or needed a ride. He'd pick up small gifts for her, like a favorite chocolate bar or a novel by a new author he thought she'd enjoy. But she also saw a certain guardedness. Whenever she steered the conversation toward his past, he'd gently deflect, focusing instead on questions about her life. One Monday night, after a grueling double shift at the diner, Lucy was locking up with Don. The old cook handed her an extra bag of leftover biscuits and a container of soup. "Here," he said, winking. "Take this home. It's cold out there tonight." "Thanks, Don," Lucy replied, grateful. She was stepping out into the icy air when she saw Jacob leaning against his beat-up old sedan across the street, hands in his pockets. Even from a distance, she could see the uncertainty on his face. He raised a hand in a tentative wave. She crossed the street, heart quickening. "What are you doing here?" she asked, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. He shrugged, offering a small smile. "I figured you might need a lift home after a long day. I was already out running errands, so—" Lucy's heart squeezed at the gesture. "You really don't have to keep looking out for me," she said, but she couldn't hide the appreciation in her voice. "But thank you. I'd love a ride." Inside the car, the heater whirred noisily. Lucy hugged the bag of biscuits and soup on her lap. Jacob drove carefully, as if every pothole might jolt him awake. Despite the car's rumble, a comforting silence settled between them. Lucy caught herself stealing glances at Jacob's profile, noticing the way the streetlights illuminated his thoughtful expression. He finally broke the silence. "You must be exhausted." "Yeah," Lucy admitted with a tired chuckle. "Serving coffee to half the town can wear a person out." Jacob laughed softly, a sound she rarely heard but found she loved. "Still, you're always smiling when I see you. You have this light about you. It's really something." Lucy felt a flutter in her chest. "Thanks. I guess I've just had to learn to find joy in the small things. Life's too short to be miserable." They arrived at her apartment, a modest brick building that had seen better days. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows. Jacob turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved, the quiet hum of the heater the only sound. "Would you like to come up for a bit?" Lucy heard herself ask, surprising even herself. She clarified quickly, It's nothing fancy, but I have leftover biscuits and Don's soup. She lifted the bag. We can share. He hesitated, and Lucy sensed he was weighing how close he could let himself get. Finally, he nodded. That'd be nice. Thanks. They climbed the narrow staircase, the peeling wallpaper and creaky steps, a testament to the building's age. In her small apartment, Lucy flipped on the overhead light, revealing a cozy, if sparsely furnished, living space. She busied herself warming the soup on her single-burner hot plate, while Jacob took in his surroundings. You live alone? He asked gently. She nodded. My mum has a place across town, but she's got her own life. I needed my independence. Lucy poured the soup into 2 mismatched bowls, then sliced the biscuits open. They sat on her thrifted love seat, an olive green relic from the 1970s, and ate quietly. The room was so small that Jacob's knee occasionally brushed Lucy's. Each time her pulse quickened. When the meal was done, Jacob insisted on washing the bowls in her tiny sink. Lucy leaned against the counter, watching him. You know, she said softly, I've never met anyone quite like you. He turned dripping bowl in hand and looked at her curiously. Is that a good thing? She smiled. Yes. It's a very good thing. In that moment, Lucy realized she was on the edge of something she both yearned for and feared letting someone into her life in a deeper way. She wondered what secrets Jacob kept behind that gentle exterior, but for now she allowed herself to enjoy his presence, to savor the warmth of shared soup and soft conversation. It was enough for the moment to simply be together. Weeks turned into a couple of months, and the bond between Lucy and Jacob grew. Every new day felt like a small step deeper into each other's hearts. Still, Lucy's world remained rooted in her duties at the diner and the ever-present worry of financial strain. In contrast, Jacob seemed to drift between odd jobs, never sharing much detail. He mentioned once that he was helping out with some bookkeeping at a local repair shop. Another time he disappeared for a day or 2, returning only with a vague explanation of handling personal matters. Despite the mysteries, Lucy's feelings for Jacob continued to blossom. He treated her with a kindness and respect she rarely found in her everyday world. There was a sense of safety whenever she was with him, an unspoken promise that for once life would not let her down so cruelly. One cold evening after the last customer had shuffled out of the diner, Jacob appeared with an umbrella to escort Lucy home. The rain was coming down in sheets, and even the dim glow of streetlights struggled to pierce the thick darkness. They huddled under the canopy shoulders, touching hearts pounding. Do you trust me? Jacob asked quietly, barely audible above the torrent. Lucy glanced up, her hair matted with drizzle. What do you mean? He took a breath as though summoning courage. I've been wanting to do something for a while, and I'm not sure how you'll take it. He paused. But you deserve more than just leftover biscuits and midnight walks. I want to show you something. Will you come with me? Her mind whirled with curiosity. She nodded without hesitation. Yes. Lead the way. They walked a few more blocks until they reached a small parking lot where Jacob's sedan waited. The umbrella was left on the hood, forgotten, as they both climbed into the car, soaked from the storm. With the windshield wipers thudding back and forth, Jacob guided the car onto the main road and out of town, heading toward the highway. Lucy's stomach fluttered. Jacob, where are we going? He gave a soft smile, eyes focused on the slick road. Somewhere special. They drove for nearly an hour, rain pelting the car, the darkness broken only by the beams of the headlights. Lucy dozed off at one point, lulled by the steady motion and the warmth of the car heater. When she woke, they were pulling off a winding road onto a gravel path lined with towering trees. The storm had diminished to a drizzle, and the faint moonlight revealed a clearing up ahead. Jacob parked near a small lake, its surface rippling with each raindrop. The place was hauntingly beautiful, even in the gloom. Lucy could make out a charming cabin on the opposite shore, lights glowing warmly from its windows. "This is where I come when I need to think," Jacob explained, cutting the engine. He opened the door, stepping out into the cool, damp night. Lucy followed, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "I stumbled on this place a while back. It's owned by a friend, but he lets me use it." The mention of a friend momentarily piqued Lucy's curiosity, but she didn't pry. Instead, she let herself be guided toward a small dock. They stood on the wooden planks, gazing at the dark water beneath them. The cabin's reflection danced across the surface. Jacob reached for Lucy's hand. "I know this might seem strange, bringing you here in the middle of the night," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I wanted to share something that's special to me. A place that feels like peace." Lucy squeezed his hand, her heart beating fast. She felt an inexplicable sense of belonging, as if this were more than just a random location. It was a glimpse into Jacob's soul. The water lapped against the dock, a soothing sound that harmonized with the final drizzle of rain. In that quiet, secret space, Jacob turned to face Lucy, the soft moonlight catching in his eyes. He lifted a trembling hand to brush a strand of wet hair from her face. "Lucy," he whispered, "ever since I met you, I felt like I could breathe again. I know I've got secrets, and I know life can be complicated, but—" She silenced him with a gentle kiss, her lips meeting his in a moment that felt like it was written in the stars. All the longing, the worry, the unspoken questions melted away in that tender connection. Their hands interlocked, and for that brief instant, they were entirely vulnerable and entirely safe. When they finally broke apart, Jacob pressed his forehead against hers. Lucy's breath came in shallow bursts, her mind swirling. She wanted to ask about his past, about his odd jobs, about the cabin, about everything. But in that sacred moment, none of it mattered more than the warmth of his embrace. They spent the rest of the night talking inside the cabin, sipping hot chocolate from chipped mugs. Jacob held her close, and Lucy felt an anchor in him she'd never felt before. She didn't realize it at the time, but that night by the lake set into motion the events that would lead her to marry this enigmatic man she thought was as humble and financially strapped as she was. What Lucy couldn't see yet, what Jacob was still so afraid to reveal, was that behind his tender eyes lay a life far more complicated than she could imagine. And soon, those hidden truths would come rushing to the surface, changing the course of their lives forever. In the weeks that followed their late-night escape to the lake cabin, Lucy found herself glowing with a happiness she'd never quite experienced. Customers at the diner started teasing her about the dreamy smile that refused to leave her face. Don, who'd seen Lucy through years of ups and downs, asked her one morning, "So who's the lucky guy, Lucy girl?" She'd only grin and shrug her cheeks, burning pink. Jacob continued to show up regularly at the diner, but now their relationship was no secret. A handful of Lucy's co-workers shot her knowing smiles whenever he walked in. She accepted the playful nudges with grace, even though a tiny voice inside her still nagged. "You know so little about him." But the bigger voice, the one in her heart, overwhelmed that caution with a simple truth. She loved him. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Jacob suggested they take a drive to visit Lucy's mother. "I'd like to meet her," he said, his tone earnest. Lucy felt a squeeze of anxiety. Her mom, Vera Turner, was a strong-willed woman who rarely held back her opinions, especially about Lucy's life choices. Nevertheless, Lucy agreed. They pulled up to a small, single-story home with a yard full of potted plants. Lucy's mother, wearing her usual floral apron, greeted them at the door. She was short, with silver-streaked hair, pulled into a tight bun, and eyes that seemed to see right through pretenses. Vera gave Jacob a once-over. "Well, so you're the man my daughter's all starry-eyed about," she said, hands on her hips. "Come in. I've got iced tea." Lucy winced at her mother's brusque tone, but Jacob smiled politely and followed her inside. The house was cozy, cluttered with knickknacks and old photographs. They settled in the living room, perched on an old sofa that sagged in the middle. Vera served iced tea in tall glasses with lemon slices, then sat in her rocking chair, eyes darting between Lucy and Jacob like a hawk. "So, Jacob," she began, "where exactly do you come from?" He hesitated a second. "I grew up in the Chicago area," he answered carefully. "Spent most of my life in the city." Vera nodded slowly. "And what brought you to our humble town?" "A need for a change," he said. "I was burned out. Needed some peace." "Peace," Vera echoed, as if testing the word. She sipped her tea. "Well, Lucy's told me about how you two met. She seems taken with you." She narrowed her gaze, leaning forward. "Are your intentions with my daughter serious?" "Jacob." Lucy nearly choked on her drink. "Mom." Jacob's face softened, and he reached for Lucy's hand right there on her mother's worn coffee table. "I intend to be the best man I can for her," he said, voice steady. "I don't take Lucy lightly. I hope in time I can earn your trust." Vera studied him for a long moment before a faint smile cracked her stern expression. "That's the right answer," she replied, though Lucy knew her mother would be cautious until she was sure Jacob's words were real. They spent the afternoon chatting about Lucy's childhood and her mother's job as a seamstress for the local bridal store. Vera recounted funny stories of Lucy's teenage years, like the time she accidentally dyed her hair green in a misguided attempt to look cool. Jacob listened attentively, laughing at the right moments, asking thoughtful questions. By evening, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the modest front yard. Vera walked them to the door. She gave Lucy a hug, then looked Jacob in the eye. "Take care of my girl," she said. "She's all I have." Jacob nodded gently, squeezing Lucy's hand. "I promise." On the drive home, Lucy felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you for that," she said quietly, glancing at him in the waning light. "My mum, she's not the easiest person to impress." Jacob kept his eyes on the road. "I understand. She wants to make sure you're safe. Honestly, I admire her for it." Lucy's heart swelled. She leaned her head against his shoulder, letting herself revel in the warmth of his presence. At that moment, she believed they could handle anything together. The town might be small, the diner wages modest, and her mother's protective instincts fierce, but love felt bigger than all of it. Yet an unspoken truth hovered just beneath their conversation. Jacob still hadn't told Lucy the full story about his life before Westwood. Lucy sensed it, felt the weight of it in the silences that sometimes fell between them. She didn't push. She wanted Jacob to share in his own time. As they pulled up to Lucy's apartment, a warm glow in the windows welcomed them. She reached for the door handle, pausing. "Are you coming in?" she asked softly. He smiled, cutting the engine. If you'll have me. She would always have him, she thought. Little did Lucy know, a much larger test of that promise was coming. One that would begin to unravel the careful illusions Jacob had so painstakingly maintained, and one that would challenge Lucy's trust in ways she never imagined. Months passed, and Lucy and Jacob's relationship deepened in ways both comforting and exciting. They had settled into a kind of peaceful rhythm mornings at the diner evenings, taking walks or cooking simple dinners in Lucy's cramped apartment. Jacob continued his mysterious, odd jobs, sometimes leaving for a day or two, but always returning with that same quiet warmth. One chilly afternoon, as Lucy's shift came to a close, Jacob entered the diner carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Her heart melted at the sight flowers in winter, even if they were likely from the nearby greenhouse. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried over, cheeks flushed. "For you," he said simply, handing her the bouquet. "Thought they might brighten your day." Lucy beamed, and Don teased them from behind the grill, muttering something about young love. She clocked out early, and they walked outside together, the sky overcast but the air fresh. Jacob guided her to a bench across from the diner. "I've got something to tell you." He began shifting uneasily. Lucy's stomach twisted. She waited. "I know I've been secretive about my past, but there's a reason. I've hurt people. Not physically," he quickly clarified, "but emotionally. I was involved in a life where money and power were everything, and I didn't always make the best choices. I don't want to go back to that." Lucy listened, heart pounding. She realized she was holding her breath. "Jacob, whatever you did before, you're trying to change now, right? That's what matters." He looked at her with a flood of relief. "Yes, it means everything that you understand." She wrapped her arms around him. The significance of this partial confession weighed on her, but her love for him overrode any fear. She still didn't know the full extent of his secrets, but she believed in his capacity for goodness. Later that week, an unexpected event shook their routine. The landlord of Lucy's building announced that rent would increase by nearly 20% at the end of the month. Lucy was devastated. She had budgeted every penny, and this new expense threatened to push her finances over the edge. She spent several nights tossing and turning her mind, swirling with numbers she couldn't stretch any further. One night, she broke down in front of Jacob while they were eating dinner, simple scrambled eggs and toast. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she explained her dilemma. "I don't know if I can afford this place anymore," she confessed. "I've been saving for a better future, but now I might have to move back with my mom. I feel like I'm failing." Jacob gently took her hand. "You're not failing, Lucy. You're doing everything you can." She shook her head, angry at the injustice of life's burdens. "I'm so tired of living on the edge, not knowing if I'll make rent or if I can afford groceries." Then softly, Jacob proposed something that took her by surprise. "Lucy, I've been thinking, I know it's soon, but would you consider marrying me?" Lucy froze, her teary eyes widening. "Jacob, that's a big step. Are you sure?" He grasped her hands, looking deeply into her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, and I want to give you the security and happiness you deserve." Her mind spun with a mix of emotions, shock love, relief fear. It was true she loved him, yearned for a future with him. But was this the right time? Was she ready for marriage? Yet the sincerity in his gaze melted her doubts. She recalled the many moments of kindness he had shown, the way his presence made her feel protected. And though his past was still murky, his devotion to her was undeniable. She nodded slowly, tears turning to a shaky smile. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll marry you." Jacob exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for years. He pulled her into his arms, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Outside, the winter wind howled, but in Lucy's small apartment, the warmth of promise filled every corner. Within days, they shared the news with Lucy's mother, who after some initial shock offered her cautious blessing. Don at the diner clapped Jacob on the shoulder with a hearty, "Congrats, kid." But not everyone was entirely supportive. Some of Lucy's co-workers whispered about Jacob's past, about how little they really knew of him. Lucy tried to ignore the rumors, clinging to the belief that love could conquer whatever secrets Jacob was afraid to share. Before long, wedding preparations were underway. It wasn't going to be lavish or large, just a simple ceremony in the local church, followed by a modest reception in the diner's banquet room. Lucy opted for a second-hand wedding gown that her mother helped alter. Jacob wore a suit borrowed from a friend. At least that's what he told Lucy. Unbeknownst to Lucy, Jacob had other plans in motion. Plans that involved more than just booking a church or choosing a wedding cake. He had arrangements, phone calls and undisclosed details that he kept hidden, all in an effort to preserve the illusion that he was just a man with little means. He believed he was protecting Lucy from a world she didn't need to be part of, yet he also knew the truth would have to come out eventually. As the date drew nearer, Lucy felt a blend of excitement and nerves. She was marrying a man she loved deeply, but also one who remained partly a mystery. Little did she know that the wedding night would reveal far more than she had ever anticipated, shattering her assumptions and rewriting their future in ways she could never have predicted. The day of the wedding arrived with an unexpected clarity in the air, as though the entire town held its breath in anticipation. Lucy woke before dawn, her heart hammering with a mixture of joy and anxiety. Her mother fussed over her dress, making last-minute adjustments, while Lucy stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked almost unrecognizable, a vision in white satin, her auburn hair pinned up in soft curls, a delicate veil framing her face. "You look beautiful," Vera whispered, eyes glossy with tears. "Your father would be proud." Lucy swallowed hard, touched by her mother's words. She clutched the small bouquet of hand-tied daisies and roses, a thrifty arrangement that nevertheless felt perfect. This was her day, the day she would pledge her life to the man she loved. Across town, Jacob stood in a cramped side room of the church, adjusting his tie. Don, serving as his best man for the day, patted him on the shoulder. "You all right, kid? You look like you're about to face a firing squad." Jacob let out a tense laugh. "I'm just nervous, I guess." His gaze drifted to the small window where sunlight poured in. A cascade of emotions roiled within him. Excitement, fear, guilt. He ran a hand through his hair, wishing he could fully come clean with Lucy before this step. But the moment had passed, and he told himself he'd explain everything soon once they were legally bound. Then maybe she'd forgive him for his deception. The church was modest but charming. Friends, neighbors, and regulars from the diner filled the wooden pews. The air buzzed with whispered conversations. At the front, Jacob waited with a trembling heart as the organist began to play. He glanced out at the small crowd, Ms. Rowe's old man Harris co-workers from the diner, even a few curious locals who simply loved a wedding. Then Lucy appeared, stepping into the aisle on her mother's arm. The music swelled, and every head turned to watch her. Jacob felt a rush of emotion at the sight of her, in that white gown, her eyes shining brighter than he'd ever seen. For a moment, all worries vanished. This was the woman he wanted to spend his life with, the one who made him feel real again. Vera gave Lucy's hand to Jacob, squeezing it gently in warning and blessing. The pastor began to speak, reciting the familiar words of matrimony. Lucy's voice trembled as she said her vows, but her eyes remained locked on Jacob. He spoke his vows in a voice that quivered with both love and withheld truths. When the rings were exchanged, Lucy's heart soared. She felt as though she was stepping into a dream, no longer Lucy Turner, the struggling waitress, but Lucy Hargreaves, a woman bound by love to the kindest soul she'd ever met. At the reception in the diner's banquet room, people laughed, danced, and ate simple fare. Don prepared a special wedding cake, 2 tiers of vanilla buttercream, topped with plastic figurines of a bride and groom. Some of Lucy's co-workers pitched in to decorate the space with balloons and streamers. The radio played soft tunes, and couples shuffled across the makeshift dance floor. Lucy and Jacob shared their first dance, swaying gently, while onlookers smiled. She laid her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Despite the small budget and the plain setting, the love in the room was palpable. A humble wedding, but one brimming with genuine warmth. By evening, the guests trickled out, leaving only a handful of close friends and family. Lucy changed out of her wedding gown into a simple white sundress. The plan was to drive to a nearby bed and breakfast for their wedding night, a modest place that offered a special discount for newlyweds. Jacob insisted on covering the costs. "It's the least I can do," he said, kissing Lucy's hand as they left the diner. They drove away amid a shower of birdseed and the cheers of well-wishers. Lucy's cheeks hurt from smiling so much, but she couldn't stop. She felt like she was floating, like maybe this was the start of the life she'd always hoped for. They arrived at the quaint bed and breakfast, tucked into a secluded corner of the countryside. The innkeeper, a cheerful older woman, gave them a room at the end of the hallway, decorated with rose petals and lit by soft lamp glow. Lucy giggled at the sight. "It's beautiful," she said, stepping into the room as Jacob carried her over the threshold playfully. He set her down, gently shutting the door behind them. Silence fell broken only by the muffled sounds of crickets outside. Lucy turned to face her husband, her heart full to bursting. They embraced, locking eyes. She felt so safe, so certain. She had no idea that the next few hours would upend almost every assumption she'd ever made about him. Jacob stroked her cheek. "Lucy, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." His voice was thick with emotion, and Lucy suddenly felt a jolt of anxiety. She swallowed. "What is it?" He fished a small key from his pocket, stepping over to a locked travel bag. Her stomach twisted with uncertainty. "Jacob, you're scaring me." He exhaled, kneeling by the bag. "I never wanted to lie to you, but I was afraid you would see me differently." Lucy's mind raced. Lie to me about what a million possibilities flashed through her thoughts. Was he in debt? Was he wanted for a crime? Had he been married before? Jacob clicked open the lock, unzipping the bag with shaking hands. Then, under the soft glow of the lamplight, he pulled out documents, bank statements, and a small stack of glossy cards. Lucy's eyes landed on an unmistakable emblem, the name of a luxury investment firm in Chicago. Another envelope displayed a figure so large she thought it must be a mistake, a bank balance with an absurd number of zeros. She stared, uncomprehending. "Jacob, what is all this?" He took a trembling breath. "I'm not poor, Lucy. I'm a millionaire." And in that moment, the fragile world Lucy thought she knew shattered around her. Lucy's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the documents spread across the bed. The moment felt surreal, an abrupt end to the warm glow of their wedding day. She wavered on her feet, stepping back until she bumped into the dresser. Her gaze flickered from the stacks of paper to Jacob, whose face was etched with guilt. I don't understand," she stammered. "You said you were burnt out on finance, that you were struggling." Her mind replayed every subtle hint she had overlooked. The worn sweater, the single mug of coffee, the borrowed suit for the wedding. It all felt like a carefully crafted lie. Jacob swallowed hard. "I never meant to deceive you," he began, his voice trembling. "I was burnt out from a life that revolved around money. Yes, I am wealthy. I inherited a fortune when my grandmother died, and I made it grow through some aggressive investments." He paused, his eyes pleading. "But I was miserable. My life was all about profit margins and boardrooms. I needed to escape to find what really mattered. That's why I came to Westwood." Lucy's pulse thundered in her ears. "So you pretended to be broke?" she asked, voice wavering between disbelief and anger. Jacob lowered his head. "I wanted someone to see me, not the money, not the name, just me. When I met you, I felt found. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd treat me differently. Or worse, you'd reject me." She sank onto the edge of the bed, the crinoline beneath her sundress rustling. The wedding night had taken a jarring turn. She glanced at the numbers on the bank statement figures, beyond anything she had ever imagined. All those times, when I struggled with rent or worried about groceries, why didn't you help me? He exhaled shakily, crossing the room to kneel before her. "I did in small ways. But I was afraid that if I came in, like some wealthy savior, you'd never believe I wanted you for you, not out of pity or control." He gently reached for her hands. "I'm sorry. I thought I was protecting what we had." Lucy withdrew her hands, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Part of her wanted to scream at him for the deception. Another part felt overwhelmed with relief. He wasn't a criminal, at least. But mostly she felt betrayed. She'd offered him her vulnerability, her struggle, believing they were in the same boat. And now she discovered that every midnight worry, every hour spent counting tips, every fear of losing her apartment, he could have alleviated it all in the blink of an eye. "But you never gave me the chance," she whispered, voice choked. "You decided I couldn't be trusted with the truth." A wave of guilt crossed Jacob's face. "No, Lucy. It's not that I didn't trust you. I didn't trust myself. I didn't want to go back to being that man who used money as a shield." Silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. The antique clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, counting down the precious minutes of their wedding night. Lucy turned her head away, staring at the rose petals scattered across the room. It was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of her life. She drew a shaky breath. "We're married," she said, as if reminding herself of the reality. "I don't even know who you really are." Jacob scooted closer, desperation lacing his voice. "I'm the same man who loves you. The same man who drank coffee at your diner, who listened to your dreams about opening a bakery, who comforted you when you were worried." He touched her arm lightly. "Money doesn't change that." She lifted her eyes to meet his. The sincerity there tugged at her even as her hurt ran deep. "I need time," she said, pulling away. "I can't just flip a switch and be okay with this." He nodded, tears threatening to spill from his own eyes. "I understand. Take all the time you need. But please, please believe I love you." Lucy inhaled a ragged breath, her wedding dress suddenly feeling suffocating. She grabbed her overnight bag and stood. "I'm going to another room," she managed, voice breaking. I can't right now." Without waiting for his response, she strode out into the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the polished wood floor. The irony weighed heavily on her, married for only a few hours, and already they were sleeping apart. But the storm of emotions inside her wouldn't settle. She felt both cheated and foolish, wondering if every tender moment between them had been built on a lie. Behind her, she heard Jacob call her name softly, but she didn't stop. She needed space to process this revelation, space to figure out if the foundation of their love could survive such a colossal lie. Lucy slipped into an empty guest room at the far end of the hall, closing the door with trembling hands. Leaning against the door, she slid down to the floor, tears spilling freely. Outside, the moon shone brightly, illuminating a sky filled with stars. But Lucy felt nothing but darkness and confusion. Their marriage, still so new, was now mired in secrets, and she could only wonder if love alone was enough to bridge the yawning gap between them. Lucy woke the next morning to a soft knock on the guest room door. Her eyes felt puffy from crying, and she pushed back her tangled hair, remembering where she was and why she wasn't in the honeymoon suite with her husband. Her husband. The thought brought a fresh pang of hurt. She pulled on the robe provided by the bed and breakfast and cracked open the door. Jacob stood there looking as if he hadn't slept. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hair was mussed. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly, voice laced with hesitancy. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. He entered, his shoulders hunched, as though bracing for rejection. Silence settled between them. Lucy finally sat on the edge of the bed, and Jacob stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. "I'm sorry," he began, voice thick. "I know I ruined our wedding night. You have every right to be angry." Lucy pressed her lips together, struggling to articulate how she felt. There was anger, yes, but also an ache of disappointment and a nagging sense of compassion for the man who, despite his deception, had shown her genuine kindness. She paused, searching for words. "I feel like my life got turned upside down. All these months I believed one thing about you, about our situation, and now it's like I married a stranger." Jacob's shoulders slumped. "I'm still the same person, Lucy. The money doesn't change that. The only difference is that you know more of the story now." She shook her head, frustration tightening her chest. "But it does change things, Jacob. You let me struggle thinking we were facing hardships together. You watched me cry over rent, and you said nothing." Tears gathered again at the corners of her eyes. That hurt. He took a small step forward, his voice trembling with regret. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But when I saw how hard you worked, how proud you were of managing on your own, I was afraid of sabotaging that. I've lived in a world where people equate self-worth with net worth, and I wanted you to see me as more than a bank account." Lucy sighed, running her hand through her hair. She understood his reasoning, but it still stung. "What else have you lied about?" she asked, her tone softer, but still wary. Jacob hung his head. "I told you partial truths about my past. I was involved in hedge funds, in risky financial ventures. I left because it was sucking the life out of me. But the fortune was still there, and I couldn't escape it completely." He took another tentative step closer. I'm not proud of the lies, but everything else between us was real, my feelings, my desire to build a life with you. That's all genuine." They sat in heavy silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. Lucy fiddled with the ring on her finger, the simple gold band that symbolized a union she was now unsure how to navigate. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet yet firm. "I need to figure out if I can trust you again. Without trust, I don't see how we can move forward." Jacob nodded, tears shimmering in his eyes. "I'll do anything to earn that trust back. Anything." Lucy's heart softened slightly. She reached out tentatively, placing her hand on his. "I love you, Jacob, but I also feel betrayed. Maybe we should go back to Westwood, spend some time apart, and talk through this with clearer heads." Her voice wavered, not wanting to separate but unsure of another path forward. He swallowed. "If that's what you need, then okay. But please know I'm not going anywhere. I'll be there waiting, trying to prove myself to you." A tear slipped down Lucy's cheek. She nodded, and they shared a brief, fragile embrace. It was as though they stood on a precarious ledge, uncertain whether they'd fall apart or find new footing together. They checked out of the bed and breakfast within the hour. The innkeeper, sensing the tension, offered sympathetic smiles that Lucy couldn't fully acknowledge. The drive back to Westwood was filled with Usaslunts, each lost in their own tangled thoughts. Lucy stared out the window, watching the fields and houses blur by wondering if life would ever feel normal again. Jacob occasionally glanced her way, his expression a portrait of remorse. When they reached Lucy's apartment, she quietly gathered her wedding gifts and leftover belongings from Jacob's sedan. He offered to carry them up, but she shook her head. "I just need a moment alone." He gazed at her heartbreak evident. "Call me, if you want to talk." She offered a tight nod, then made her way upstairs. Closing the door behind her, she leaned against it, breathing shakily. Married. Betrayed. Unsure. The ring on her finger felt both comforting and heavy. She slipped it off for a moment, staring at the simple band, then slid it back on. She couldn't bear to remove it fully just yet. Collapsing onto the couch, Lucy let the tears flow again. She was a waitress turned newlywed, faced with the impossible discovery that her humble husband was far from ordinary. She mourned the simplicity of the life she thought she had, as she now stood on the brink of a future that held both staggering possibilities and painful uncertainties. And she didn't know how to sort through it all, except to take it one day at a time. The next few days were a blur of conflicting emotions. Lucy threw herself into work at the diner, grateful for the distraction of pouring coffee and serving plates of scrambled eggs. Word had spread that something was off between her and Jacob, though few knew the details. Don gave her an occasional concerned glance, but he respected her silence. Vera, Lucy's mother, called daily to check in, but Lucy couldn't bring herself to confess the truth yet. She told her mom only that there had been a misunderstanding. Jacob, for his part, made himself scarce while still remaining near. He'd occasionally show up at the diner, but he wouldn't linger or approach Lucy directly unless she signaled it was okay. He spent his days talking with lawyers and financial advisors in a hotel room at the edge of town, determined to disentangle himself from the corporate web that had once defined his life. Late one evening after the diner had closed, Lucy found Jacob waiting outside in the parking lot. She paused, keys clutched in her hand, uncertain whether to walk past him or invite conversation. His gaze met hers, and she saw a vulnerability that mirrored her own sense of loss. "May I walk you home?" he asked softly. Lucy exhaled. Part of her wanted to shut him out, but the other part still loved him and ached for resolution. "Okay," she whispered. They walked in silence for a while, the streetlights casting elongated shadows on the sidewalk. Lucy's thoughts churned her frustration, her sadness, and the small spark of hope she still harbored. Eventually, she broke the silence. "Jacob, I can't keep pretending I don't love you," she said, voice trembling. "But I also can't pretend that everything's fine. The trust we had, it's damaged." He nodded, heart heavy. "I know. I'm trying to fix it. I've already started liquidating some of my assets, figuring out what I really need and what I can do without. Money isn't my priority anymore, Lucy. You are." They stopped under a street lamp near Lucy's apartment building. The glow illuminated the tears in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to give up your fortune," she said, shaking her head. "I just wish you had told me the truth sooner. We might have saved ourselves this pain." Jacob reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. "I realize that now," he whispered, voice thick with regret, "and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life showing you who I truly am." Standing there, Lucy felt the weight of their shared pain, but also the persistent flutter of love that refused to die. She let out a shaky breath. "I can't promise that I'll forgive you overnight, but I do want to try, if you'll be honest with me. Completely honest from now on." A flicker of hope lit in his eyes. "I promise." They parted ways, Lucy climbing the steps to her apartment alone. But that night, she slept a little easier. The ring on her finger feeling less like a chain and more like a symbol of a complicated bond. She still had doubts, but the door to reconciliation was cracked open. Over the next week, they scheduled a series of quiet meetings, often in the safety of Lucy's apartment or a secluded corner booth at the diner after closing. During these talks, Jacob laid out details of his finances, showing Lucy the extent of his wealth and the steps he was taking to simplify his life. He spoke candidly about the corporate world he'd left, the cutthroat culture that had consumed his identity. He revealed the guilt he carried for prioritizing material success over emotional well-being. Lucy listened, asked questions, and slowly began to see not just a rich man hiding behind tattered clothing, but a wounded soul searching for redemption. Their conversations were hard, often bringing Lucy to tears when she imagined all the nights she'd lain awake worrying about money, while Jacob possessed more than enough to change her circumstances. But she also recognized how much he'd given up family expectations, high society connections to find authenticity. Finally, one evening in her apartment, while a gentle rain tapped at the windows, they came to a turning point. "I want us to start fresh," Lucy said, her hand resting over Jacob's. "We're married now, and I want that to mean something real." He looked into her eyes, voice trembling with emotion. "Does that mean you'll move in with me? Let's find a home we can build together. Nothing extravagant, just a place that fits both of us." Lucy hesitated, the wound still tender. "Let me think about it," she replied. "I need to ease into this, but I'm willing to move forward, one step at a time." Jacob nodded, relief evident. They sealed the moment with a gentle kiss, tears mingling with laughter as they both felt the first real signs of healing. The chasm between them began to close, replaced by a cautious but determined unity. Their journey was far from over. Mistrust doesn't vanish overnight, and old habits can resurface. But for the first time since that fateful wedding night, Lucy felt a glimmer of optimism about their future. They were two flawed people, bound by love and a legal vow, striving to craft a new beginning out of scattered truths and hard-earned confessions. Only time would tell if love would truly conquer all. But in that moment, amid the soft patter of rain and the warmth of a second chance, they were willing to believe it might. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of love, secrets, and second chances. Lucy and Jacob's story reminds us that true connection often requires vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to face our mistakes. Even when life throws unexpected twists our way, like discovering the person you married holds a hidden fortune, it's the power of genuine love and understanding that can mend what's broken. Their tale is a testament to the resilience of the human heart, proving that even deep betrayals can be overcome when both partners commit to rebuilding trust. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to continue supporting our channel. Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and remember to subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring tales of triumph, love, and the unbreakable spirit that lives within us all. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.